The night my world fell apart, fireworks lit up the sky for someone else's joy while my family chose my sister's birthday over my grief. I stood in the shadows, holding my daughter, abandoned by those who should have held us tight during our darkest hour. What no one expected was that a single letter would flip our lives upside down when the will readings revealed everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The air was thick with the scent of burnt gunpowder, laughter echoing from my sister's birthday party next door as my daughter Anna clung to my waist, her eyes wide and searching. Every burst of color in the night sky felt like a mockery of our pain. Raphael had been gone for only 3 days. 3 days of hollow emptiness where my husband's voice should have been. And yet here was my family, celebrating as if nothing had happened, as if our world hadn't just shattered into a million jagged pieces. "Mommy, it's too loud," Anna whispered, her small hands pressing against her ears. She was only 7, too young to fully understand death, but old enough to feel the gaping absence of her father. I nodded, stroking her hair, unable to find words that wouldn't crack with resentment. My mother had called that morning. "Darling, I know it's difficult, but Vanessa's birthday has been planned for months. We can't cancel now. You understand, don't you?" I didn't understand, not at all, but I nodded into the phone, my throat tight with unshed tears. The wall between our houses had never felt thinner than tonight. Every cheer, every pop of a champagne bottle, every chorus of happy birthday, seeped through the plaster like poison. I could picture them all, my parents, my 2 brothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, gathered around Vanessa as she blew out 30 candles, while Anna and I sat in the dark, surrounded by sympathy cards we'd received from strangers at Raphael's workplace. "Should we go say hello?" I asked Anna half-heartedly, knowing she would refuse. She shook her head fiercely, burying her face deeper into my sweater, Raphael's sweater, actually, still carrying the faint scent of his cologne. "They didn't even bring us cake," she mumbled, and I felt my heart crack a little more. Such a simple observation from a child, yet it cut straight to the core of what hurt most. We had become an afterthought, an inconvenient reminder of tragedy at the edges of their celebration. I swallowed my heartbreak, feeling invisible in a house that should have been filled with sympathy. That night, Anna whispered, "Mom, why do they care more about cake than about us?" And I had no answer, just the cold ache of betrayal. I tucked her into bed, kissing her forehead, promising that tomorrow would be better, though I didn't believe it myself. As I closed her bedroom door, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "We saved you both some cake. Stop by tomorrow." I stared at the message until the screen went dark, wondering how long it would take for them to realize that some wounds couldn't be healed with leftover birthday cake. The day of Raphael's funeral arrived with a gray sky that seemed fitting for the occasion. I stood in the front row of the small chapel, watching my parents move through the service with a chilly efficiency that made my stomach turn. My mother checked her watch 3 times during the priest's words, her expensive perfume overwhelming the scent of funeral lilies. Not once did she reach for my hand or even meet my eyes when I glanced her way, searching for any sign of shared grief. My father stood ramrod straight beside her, his face a mask of appropriate solemnity that never quite reached his eyes. Anna sat beside me in her simple black dress, her small shoulders stiff with tension, yet neither parent thought to comfort her. When the service ended, neighbors and distant relatives approached us with warm embraces and whispered condolences. Mrs. Peterson from across the street held me tightly, telling me how proud Raphael had been of me, while Mr. Jenkins pressed a casserole dish into my hands with instructions to heat it at 350 degrees. But even as these near strangers offered comfort, I watched my parents slip out the side door of the chapel, my mother already on her phone. They didn't even say goodbye or tell us how they'd get home. The message was clear. Their obligation had been fulfilled. "Where did they go?" Anna whispered, her voice small as she clutched my hand. "Probably had somewhere important to be," I replied, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice for her sake. The silence my parents left behind felt heavier than the grief itself. Standing there with Anna's trembling hand in mine, surrounded by people who seemed to care more about our loss than our own family did, I realized with startling clarity that from now on, it was just the 2 of us. Raphael had been our buffer, our protector, the one person who could occasionally pierce our parents' indifference. Without him, Anna and I were truly on our own in a way that felt both terrifying and strangely liberating. As we walked out into the pale afternoon sunlight, I squeezed my sister's hand and made a silent promise to Raphael that I would be for Anna what he had always been for me, the family she could count on. I found myself standing in our bedroom, staring at the walls that now felt like they were closing in on me. It had been a week since the funeral, and every corner of our house held memories of Raphael that cut like glass. I couldn't bear it anymore. Not the empty side of the bed, not his coffee mug still sitting unwashed in the sink, not the silence that screamed his absence. With trembling hands, I pulled out our suitcases and began filling them with essentials. I carefully folded Anna's favorite stuffed bunny on top of her small pile of clothes, then moved to the bookshelf where I selected the dog-eared copies of the books Raphael used to read to her every night. "Are we going on a trip, Mommy?" Anna appeared in the doorway, her eyes still carrying that lost look that had settled in them since the accident. "Sort of, sweetheart," I answered, kneeling to her level. "We're going to stay at Vovo's house for a while. Raphael's grandmother had called yesterday, offering her home to us, a sanctuary away from the suffocating grief that filled every inch of our apartment. The drive to the edge of town took 20 minutes, each mile putting distance between us and the raw wound of our old life. When we pulled up to the pale yellow cottage with its weathered shutters and overgrown garden, something in my chest loosened just slightly. Anna clutched my hand as we walked up the stone path, her little fingers squeezing mine when the front door opened. Vovo Helena stood there, her silver hair pulled back in a loose bun, arms already opening to receive us. The smell hit me immediately, lavender and beeswax polish, old books and freshly baked bread. It was nothing like our home, yet somehow it felt right. "Welcome, my dears," she said, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. She had lost her grandson, yet here she was, being strong for us. That night, after a quiet dinner where Anna actually ate more than 2 bites for the first time in days, I tucked her into the small bed in what had once been Raphael's childhood room. The walls were still adorned with faded soccer posters and shelves of model airplanes. "Mommy," Anna whispered as I pulled the quilt up to her chin, "can we stay here forever? I don't want to go back." Her voice trembled with the effort of trying to sound brave, though her eyes betrayed her fear. I smoothed her hair back from her forehead, swallowing past the lump in my throat. "I don't know about forever, sweetie, but we can stay as long as we need to, and I promise you this, we're going to build something new together, you and me. It might feel like all the pieces are broken right now, but we'll find a way to put them back together." She nodded solemnly, her eyelids already growing heavy. "Daddy would want us to be brave, right?" "Yes," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "He would." One quiet afternoon, while I was sorting through bills at the kitchen table, Anna approached me with a folded piece of paper. Her eyes were serious, almost businesslike, as she handed it over. "I made something," she said, standing back to watch my reaction. I unfolded it to find what she had labeled in crooked letters as her emotional bill. My heart nearly stopped as I scanned the childish handwriting. There were itemized entries: 12 missing goodnight hugs from Grandma, 5 birthday calls from Aunt Melissa that never came, 365 days without Uncle Tom's silly jokes. At the bottom, she'd drawn a sad face and written, "Payment due, family time." I looked up at my daughter, this 7-year-old who had somehow found a way to quantify her heartache. "Anna, sweetheart," I started, but words failed me. She climbed onto my lap, something she'd been doing less frequently as she grew more independent. "It's okay, Mom," she said, patting my hand. "I know they're busy with Cousin Emma's birthday and stuff." The casual way she dismissed her own pain made something crack inside me. I hadn't realized she was keeping such careful count of every slight, every missed opportunity for connection. While I'd been focused on my own grief, Anna had been silently tallying the cost of our family's absence in her own life. That night, after tucking her in, I sat on the edge of my bed and wept. Not just for David, but for what our daughter was learning about family, that love could be conditional, that some people mattered more than others. I wondered what kind of adult she would become, carrying these early lessons of abandonment. The next morning, I called my therapist and scheduled an emergency session. I needed help figuring out how to shield Anna from the worst of this family fracture without teaching her to swallow her feelings. The therapist suggested family art therapy, something Anna and I could do together to express what we couldn't say in words. That weekend, we spread a canvas on the living room floor and painted our feelings. Anna created swirls of blue and purple, with tiny yellow dots she called happy moments. I watched her work, marveling at her resilience, her ability to still find those points of light. When she asked about my painting, angry red slashes across the canvas, I told her honestly that I was still learning how to handle big feelings, just like her. "We're the same," she said, adding a red streak to her own painting. "We're a team." In that moment, I promised myself that whatever came next with my family, I would make sure Anna never had to write another emotional bill again. I didn't expect anyone to show up at our door that rainy Tuesday afternoon, 2 months after the funeral. When I opened it, there stood Lucas, Raphael's younger brother, soaking wet with 2 worn duffel bags at his feet, and that same crooked smile that reminded me so much of my late husband. "I heard you two might need some company," he said, water dripping from his dark curls. Lucas had been working in São Paulo for years, rarely visiting. We'd only met a handful of times at family gatherings. Now here he was, asking if he could stay with us for a while. "I promised Rafa I'd always look out for you both if anything happened," he explained, his voice catching slightly. "I'm sorry it took me this long to get here." At first, I was hesitant. Our grief felt too private to share. But Anna needed something I couldn't give her alone, a connection to her father. Lucas brought that in spades. He unpacked his guitar that first night and played songs Raphael had taught him when they were teenagers. I watched from the kitchen doorway as Anna's eyes lit up for the first time in months. By the 3rd day, Lucas had established a morning routine with Anna, making ridiculous-shaped pancakes that made her giggle despite herself. He knew all Raphael's old stories, telling them with the same dramatic pauses and wild gestures. Our home, which had felt like a mausoleum of memories, began to breathe again. Lucas fixed the leaky bathroom faucet Raphael had always meant to repair. He hung string lights across our small balcony where we started having dinner when the weather permitted. "Rafa always talked about doing this," he'd say, and somehow those words didn't hurt as much anymore. One evening, I found Lucas showing Anna how to fold paper boats like Raphael used to. "Your dad and I would race these down the creek behind our house," he told her. "He always cheated by making his boats bigger." Anna laughed, a real, uninhibited laugh I hadn't heard since before the accident. I caught myself smiling too, then felt that familiar stab of guilt. Was it wrong to feel anything but grief? But watching them together, I realized Raphael would want this, his brother helping his daughter remember him with joy instead of just pain. That night, I allowed myself to believe that maybe we could find our way forward after all. Not past the grief, but through it, with unexpected help from family I barely knew. One morning, as sunlight filtered through the blinds, I found myself surrounded by cardboard boxes containing Raphael's personal items. Each object I touched carried memories. His favorite books with dog-eared pages, the collection of vintage watches he'd inherited from his grandfather, even the silly souvenir magnets we'd collected during our travels. That's when I spotted it, a cream-colored envelope with my name written in his unmistakable handwriting, the letters flowing with the precise elegance that was so uniquely his. My heart skipped a beat as I carefully broke the seal, trying to steady my trembling fingers. "My dearest Isabel," the letter began, and I could almost hear his voice reading the words. "If you're reading this, I'm no longer there to protect you and Anna as I promised." Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading his final message, filled with love, memories of our life together, and his unwavering faith in my strength. But between the tender words lay something unexpected. Detailed legal instructions. Raphael had quietly established a substantial trust fund for Anna's future, with me as the sole trustee. He had foreseen everything, working with his attorney to create ironclad provisions that would protect our daughter from anyone who might try to control her inheritance. "Keep our little girl away from those who see her as a path to wealth rather than as the precious soul she is," he wrote. "I've arranged everything so that no one, not even my parents, can interfere with her future or use financial pressure against you." The realization of what he'd done hit me like a wave. Even in death, Raphael was still protecting us, still fighting for our family. He had created a fortress around Anna's future that no one could breach, ensuring that those who had abandoned us in our grief couldn't suddenly reappear when money was involved. I clutched the letter to my chest and wept openly, a mixture of profound gratitude and renewed grief washing over me. For the first time since his passing, I felt something beyond the crushing weight of loss. I felt supported, as if Raphael's arms were still around me, guiding us forward. In that quiet moment, surrounded by his belongings, I made a silent promise to honor his wishes and protect Anna with the same fierce devotion he had shown in planning for a future he wouldn't share with us. I noticed the shift almost immediately. Whenever my parents visited after the trust fund revelation, there was a new undercurrent to their interactions with Anna. My mother would casually mention how college funds these days need proper management, while my father would talk about family financial advisors who could maximize returns. Their smiles never quite reached their eyes anymore, especially when Anna wasn't looking. One evening, after Anna had gone to bed, my mother placed her hand on mine. "Sweetheart, we've been thinking. That's quite a responsibility Raphael left you with. Perhaps we could help shoulder some of that burden." Her voice was honey-sweet, but her grip was tight. "I appreciate the concern," I replied carefully, "but I've already set up meetings with the financial advisor Raphael recommended." My father cleared his throat. "Family should handle family matters." Raphael wasn't thinking clearly at the end. "We've known Anna her entire life. We should have some input." The conversation spiraled from there. Each week brought new suggestions, thinly veiled demands, and eventually outright pressure. "It's not right for one person to control so much," my father insisted. "What if something happens to you? Shouldn't we be named as secondary trustees?" The breaking point came during Sunday dinner at their house. My father cornered me in his study, while my mother distracted Anna with dessert. "This has gone on long enough," he said, his voice low but intense. "We're her grandparents. We have rights." Raphael made his wishes very clear. I stood my ground, heart pounding. He trusted me with this responsibility. "And what makes you so special?" he demanded, color rising in his face. "What gives you the right to shut us out? We're family." Because Raphael knew I would honor his wishes, not try to control the money, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. My father's expression transformed then, the mask of concerned parent falling away completely. I saw naked disappointment, frustration, and something that looked disturbingly like betrayal flash across his face. "You've changed," he said coldly. "I don't recognize the daughter we raised anymore." In that moment, I realized with perfect clarity that I hadn't stolen anything from him. I'd simply prevented him from taking something that was never his to begin with. The realization was both empowering and profoundly sad. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Determined to turn my pain into purpose, I founded a small project in Raphael's name, a local financial education club for single mothers. I'd been sitting at our kitchen table, staring at a stack of unpaid bills when the idea struck me. Raphael had always been passionate about financial literacy, especially for women who found themselves suddenly alone. "This is how I keep him alive," I whispered to myself, wiping away tears. Lucas immediately volunteered his accounting expertise, and our neighbor, Valeria, Anna's favorite third-grade teacher, offered her classroom management skills. Together, we created a curriculum covering everything from basic budgeting to investment strategies. We started small, meeting in the community center every Thursday evening. I'd arrange folding chairs while Lucas prepared handouts and Valeria greeted nervous mothers at the door. "My husband handled all our money," one woman confessed during our first session. "I don't even know how to balance a checkbook." Her vulnerability reflected my own fears after Raphael's death, and I squeezed her hand. "We'll figure it out together," I promised. Word spread quickly. Within 3 months, we had 27 regular attendees. We celebrated each small victory: a mother negotiating her first car loan, another starting an emergency fund, a third launching a home business. The transformation in these women mirrored my own healing journey. The work gave me new strength I hadn't thought possible. Watching Anna beam with pride each time she saw her father's name on the workshop posters filled my heart. "Daddy's helping people from heaven," she'd tell anyone who would listen, her little chest puffed out with importance. Our home gradually transformed from a shrine of grief into a hub of activity. The dining room table became our planning center, covered with spreadsheets and curriculum outlines. Weekend afternoons brought volunteer meetings filled with coffee, ideas, and increasingly, laughter. Anna would sit cross-legged in the corner, coloring pictures for Daddy's ladies, as she called our participants. One evening, after everyone had gone home, Lucas stayed behind to help clean up. "Raphael would be so proud of what you've built," he said quietly, stacking the last of the coffee cups. "You've given these women something priceless: confidence." I nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The silence that had once suffocated our home had been replaced by purpose, community, and a resilience I never knew I possessed. For the first time since Raphael's death, I felt we were truly living again, not just surviving. Sophia couldn't stand being sidelined. Within days of our confrontation, she launched a social media crusade against me. Her Instagram stories and Facebook posts painted me as a greedy sister who had manipulated our parents' will and was now keeping the family apart out of spite. My own sister won't even let me see my niece anymore, she wrote, conveniently omitting how she'd treated Anna at the funeral. The comment section filled with sympathetic responses from people who only knew one side of the story. The impact in our small community was immediate. Anna came home from school in tears after overhearing classmates discussing how her mother was that awful woman who stole her aunt's inheritance. My phone stopped ringing as friends I'd known for years quietly distanced themselves. Even the cashier at our local grocery store, who had always chatted warmly with me, suddenly became coldly professional. "This is ridiculous," Lucas fumed one evening, scrolling through Sophia's latest post. "She's turning the whole town against you with these lies." Valeria, who had remained steadfastly by my side, suggested we fight back. "Not with more social media drama," she clarified, seeing my hesitation. "Let's invite people over. The neighbors, Anna's friends, parents, everyone who matters to us. Let them see the real you, not Sophia's twisted version." That weekend, we hosted a backyard barbecue. I was terrified nobody would come, but to my surprise, most invitees showed up, curiosity evident in their cautious greetings. Lucas manned the grill while Valeria expertly guided conversations toward the elephant in the room. "I've known this family for 20 years, she announced, raising her glass during an impromptu toast. "And I've never seen anyone more devoted to her parents than Emma was during their illness." She went on to tell stories I'd forgotten, nights I'd spent at the hospital, how I'd rearranged my entire life to care for them while Sophia visited only when convenient. One by one, others spoke up. Anna's teacher mentioned how I never missed a school event despite my caregiving responsibilities. Our elderly neighbor recalled how I'd shovel his walkway after caring for my parents all night. By evening's end, the atmosphere had transformed. People approached me with apologies and renewed understanding. Anna beamed as her friends and parents made plans for upcoming playdates. For the first time since the funeral, I felt the community seeing us clearly, not as characters in Sophia's drama, but as the family we truly were. "Your parents would be so proud," Lucas whispered, squeezing my hand as we watched the last guest depart. "This is exactly why they made the choices they did." Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Thomas's letter arrived 3 days later, delivered in a crisp, cream-colored envelope that bore the embossed logo of his law firm. I recognized his handwriting immediately. Neat, precise, just like him. When Raphael first introduced us years ago, I'd found Thomas intimidating with his tailored suits and careful speech. Now, his formality was a comfort. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Winters," the letter began. I read it standing in the kitchen, my coffee growing cold beside me. Thomas's words were measured, but left no room for misinterpretation. He outlined Raphael's trust in exquisite detail, explaining how my late husband had arranged for Anna's education and future to be secured regardless of family interference. As the executor of Raphael's estate and a practicing attorney, I must advise you that any attempt to contest these arrangements would not only be futile, but potentially costly. The letter continued, explaining how Raphael had anticipated potential resistance. "My client was explicit in his instructions," Thomas wrote. "The trust established for Anna is ironclad, with multiple contingencies in place should anyone attempt to redirect these funds." What struck me most was the paragraph where Thomas's professional tone softened slightly. Raphael spoke often of his concern for Anna's well-being. He believed deeply in her potential, and in Elena's judgment as her mother. I promised him I would ensure his wishes were honored, and I intend to keep that promise. My mother called that evening, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. "We received a letter today," she said without preamble. "I know," I replied. "I got one too." The silence stretched between us. "Finally," she sighed. "Your father and I need to think about things. This is unexpected." I almost laughed. Of course it was unexpected. They'd never bothered to understand Raphael or respect his intelligence. They'd seen only what they wanted to see. The charming immigrant who'd married their daughter, not the strategic thinker who'd built a successful business and planned meticulously for every contingency. "Take all the time you need," I told her, feeling something shift inside me. For the first time since Raphael's death, I felt him beside me again, his quiet strength supporting me. After we hung up, I texted Thomas a simple message. "Thank you." His reply came minutes later. "Raphael was my friend. I keep my promises." That night, Anna asked to see a photo album of her father. As we flipped through the pages, I realized Raphael had given us both the greatest gift, not just financial security, but the freedom to heal on our own terms. As spring warmed the city, Lucas received a job offer from a local tech company that seemed almost too perfect to be true. The position came with a competitive salary, flexible hours, and most importantly, it meant he could settle permanently with us instead of returning to São Paulo. When he told me the news over dinner, Anna clapped her small hands together with such excitement that her juice nearly toppled over. "Does this mean you're staying forever, Tio Lu?" she asked, her eyes wide with hope. Lucas glanced at me before answering her. "If that's okay with your mom, then yes. I'd like to stay." I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat, so I just nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. His presence anchored our small family in ways I hadn't anticipated when he first arrived. What began as temporary support had evolved into something essential for all of us. Anna took to calling him a Tio Lu with such natural affection that it melted my heart every time. She would save her school drawings for him, proudly presenting them when he returned from work. He'd examine each one with exaggerated seriousness before declaring it museum-worthy and carefully pinning it to the refrigerator. Together, we built new routines that stitched our days into a pattern of gentle normalcy. Morning walks to the corner bakery became our ritual, with Anna skipping ahead to spot neighborhood cats. Sunday lunches stretched into lazy afternoons. The three of us sprawled across the living room with books and puzzles, evenings filled with homework, stories, and laughter, the kind that starts small and builds until your sides ache. One night, after tucking Anna into bed, Lucas and I sat on the porch swing, sharing a bottle of wine under the stars. "Thank you," I whispered, not looking at him directly. "For what?" he asked. "For making this house feel like a home again." He reached for my hand, then, his fingers warm against mine. For the first time since Raphael's death, I didn't pull away from the touch of another person. Instead, I leaned slightly into his shoulder, allowing myself to acknowledge that grief and new beginnings could coexist in the same heart. The realization didn't feel like betrayal anymore. It felt like healing. Anna returned from the sleepover at her grandparents' house with her eyes shining brighter than I had seen in months. She burst through the door, waving an old, slightly faded photograph. "Mom, look what Abuela gave me," she exclaimed, carefully handing me the picture. It showed Raphael at about 7 years old, his front teeth missing, holding a soccer ball and grinning widely. The resemblance to Anna was striking. The same dimple on the left cheek, the same crinkle around the eyes when smiling. "She has so many stories about Dad," Anna continued, her words tumbling out in excitement. "Did you know he once tried to catch frogs in the creek behind their house and fell in? Or that he built a treehouse that collapsed the first time he climbed into it?" I smiled, feeling a bittersweet ache in my chest. These were stories I'd heard from Raphael himself, but hearing them retold through his mother's eyes and then through my daughter's gave them new life. Over the following weeks, Diana and Roberto became fixtures in our lives. Diana would call just to check in, or drop by with containers of homemade arroz con pollo or empanadas, Raphael's favorites that had become Anna's favorites too. "You are family," Diana told me one afternoon as we sat on my porch, watching Anna ride her bike up and down the sidewalk. "Raphael chose you, and that makes you ours forever." Her words were a balm to my soul, especially in contrast to the continued silence from my own parents. My mother had called once, a stilted conversation where she managed to avoid mentioning Raphael's name entirely. My father hadn't called at all. Diana, though, spoke of Raphael freely and often. She cried sometimes when memories hit her unexpectedly, and she never apologized for her tears. "Grief is just love with nowhere to go," she told me once, squeezing my hand. She brought photo albums, sharing stories of Raphael's childhood and teenage years. She listened when I shared my own memories, nodding and sometimes adding details from Raphael's perspective that he had shared with her. With each visit, each call, each shared meal, Diana wove a safety net beneath Anna and me. She couldn't replace what we had lost, but she created a space where our grief could exist alongside joy and laughter. In Diana's steady presence, I found something I hadn't realized I needed so desperately: permission to remain connected to Raphael while still moving forward. Her love for her son extended to us, wrapping around Anna and me like a protective embrace, keeping us tethered when we might otherwise have drifted into the darkness of our loss. At the start of the 9th month, Anna asked if we could meet my parents for ice cream in the town square. Something about her hopeful eyes made it impossible to refuse, though my stomach nodded at the thought. "They've been calling more," she said carefully. "I think they really want to try." I wasn't convinced, but I agreed, for her sake more than anything. The day arrived with perfect weather that felt mockingly cheerful. We arrived first and claimed a small plastic table near the fountain. I watched Anna order, vanilla for her, chocolate for me, while I scanned the crowd nervously. When my parents appeared, they looked smaller somehow, more hesitant than I remembered. "Thank you for coming," my mother said, her voice catching slightly as they sat down. My father nodded, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. We sat in uncomfortable silence, all 4 of us stirring our rapidly melting ice cream as if it required our complete concentration. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," my father finally said, setting down his spoon. "And talking with someone professional," my mother added quickly. What followed surprised me, an apology that came in fits and starts, imperfect and sometimes defensive, but undeniably sincere. "We got it wrong," my father admitted. "When Emily died, we were so lost in our own grief that we couldn't see yours." My mother reached across the table, not quite touching my hand but close. "We made terrible choices, especially about the birthday. There's no excuse." I sat frozen, unable to respond as they continued. They spoke of regret, of therapy sessions where they'd come to understand the damage they'd caused. "We don't expect forgiveness right away," my mother said, "but we want to earn back your trust. Small steps, day by day, if you'll let us try." Anna, who had been quietly listening, reached into her purse and pulled out a neatly folded paper. "I wrote down what I need from you both," she said with remarkable composure. "Think of it as an emotional bill." She slid it across the table. My parents looked startled but took the paper. As they read, I watched their faces shift from surprise to understanding. Anna had always been direct, but the clarity with which she outlined her boundaries impressed even me. No more comparing her to Emily. Regular check-ins without guilt trips. Respect for our decisions as adults. "This is fair," my father said finally, folding the paper carefully and tucking it into his shirt pocket. "More than fair, considering everything." My mother nodded, wiping a tear. "We can do this. We want to do this." I still didn't speak, but I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first crack in a wall I'd built higher with each passing month. Anna squeezed my hand under the table, and I squeezed back, grateful for her strength. Sophia, meanwhile, had her own reckoning. After she and her fiancé had a screaming match that the neighbors called the police about, not for violence, just for the sheer volume, she finally agreed to therapy. During our one brief phone call since then, she admitted something I never thought I'd hear. "I've always been jealous of you," she said, her voice small. "Even when we were kids, you were always so complete, like you didn't need anyone's approval. I've spent my whole life terrified of being second best." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to laugh bitterly. How could she possibly think I had it better? But another part recognized the courage it took for her to admit this. "The therapist says I've been competing with ghosts," she continued. "With Dad's memory of Mom, with your connection to Emma. I've been so afraid of being forgotten that I made myself impossible to love." I didn't forgive her that day. The wound was still too raw. But for the first time since Emma died, I felt a flicker of hope that my sister might someday grow into someone I could have in my life again. Not the same relationship we once had. That was gone. But perhaps something new, built on honesty instead of resentment. Anna, watching all of this unfold with those observant eyes of hers, seemed to absorb every lesson. She started a project at school collecting stories, not just of loss, but of resilience. Her teacher called me, moved to tears, after Anna presented her collection to the class. "Family isn't just who you're born to," Anna had told her classmates. "It's who stays when things get hard, and sometimes You have to choose your family every single day." Her words spread through the school like wildfire. Other children started sharing their own complicated family stories: divorces, step-siblings, grandparents raising them, foster care. Anna created a safe space where these weren't shameful secrets but badges of survival. One evening, as I tucked her in, she asked me if I thought her mom would be proud of her. "Every single minute of every single day," I said without hesitation. "And Grandpa too. Especially Grandpa. He'd say you got all the best parts of everyone who loved you." She smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes. I stayed a moment longer, watching her breathe, thinking about how this child, who'd lost so much, had somehow become the wisest person I knew. Through her, I was learning that grief doesn't just take away. Sometimes, when you're lucky, it gives you something too. The Financial Education Club grew beyond anything I could have imagined. What started as a small gathering in my living room had blossomed into a community of women supporting each other through life's hardest moments. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, the community center buzzed with voices of mothers from all corners of town, sharing stories over coffee and spreadsheets. Anna, who had once been so isolated in her grief, now sat at the center of it all. Last week, I watched her explain interest rates to a young widow, her hands animated as she spoke. "My brother-in-law taught me this," she said proudly. He believed financial knowledge was a form of protection. When the group broke for dinner, potluck style, as had become our tradition, Anna laughed so hard at someone's joke that she snorted, something I hadn't heard since before Raphael's passing. "You've created something beautiful here," Lucas said one evening as he helped me pack up after a session. He'd been showing up regularly, initially to provide expertise, but now I suspected it was for more than that. The way his eyes followed me around the room told a story neither of us was ready to acknowledge. Thomas had become a fixture too, bringing his legal knowledge to complement the financial advice. Raphael would be proud, he told me, his voice catching slightly. And this is exactly what he meant about protecting what matters. Together, the four of us, Lucas, Thomas, Anna, and I, began drafting plans to formalize our work. "Not just a club," Thomas explained as we huddled around my kitchen table late one night. "A foundation with real resources to help women navigate financial crises after loss." Lucas nodded, adding, "We could offer scholarships for children who've lost parents, emergency funds for immediate needs, and long-term financial planning." Anna, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. "We'll call it Raphael's Shield," she said firmly, "because that's what he was trying to be for all of us." I felt tears welling up, but didn't fight them. These weren't tears of grief anymore, or at least, not only grief, they were tears of recognition. In every spreadsheet we created, every budget we balanced, every investment we explained, Raphael's wisdom lived on. His foresight had created not just financial security for his family, but a ripple effect that was now touching dozens of lives. "Raphael's Shield," I repeated, testing the name on my tongue. It felt right, a perfect tribute to the man who had changed all our lives, even in his absence. Anna grew quieter as the anniversary of Raphael's passing approached. I could see the memories playing across her face like shadows, sometimes bringing a small smile, other times making her eyes glisten with unshed tears. During those weeks, we developed a ritual of sitting on the porch swing after dinner, talking about him until the stars appeared overhead. She told me stories I'd never heard before, how Raphael had stayed up all night to fix her bicycle chain before a big race, or how he'd once written her a poem on a napkin when she was feeling sad about a school dance. "He always knew exactly what to say," she whispered one evening, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. Even when there were no right words, somehow he found them. When the day itself arrived, we packed a small picnic and drove to Lake Meridian, where Raphael had taken them every summer. The water stretched before us, rippling with gentle waves that caught the sunlight like scattered diamonds. A family was grilling nearby, the familiar smell of charcoal and hamburgers drifting our way, reminding Anna of how Raphael always insisted on being the designated grill master, despite burning nearly everything. "He was terrible at it," she laughed, the sound genuine if a bit fragile. But no one had the heart to tell him. We sat at the edge of the dock, our feet dangling just above the water. From my backpack, I pulled out colored paper and showed Anna how to fold boats, something my grandfather had taught me years ago. On each one, we wrote messages to Raphael and wishes for ourselves. Anna's hands trembled slightly as she creased her paper, but her expression was peaceful. "I wish he could see you now," she said, launching her first boat onto the water. "He would have loved you." I watched our little fleet drift across the lake's surface, carrying our words away. Some sank quickly, others traveled farther than we expected. It felt right somehow. Some memories stay close, others fade, but all become part of the journey. As the afternoon light softened around us, Anna reached for my hand, and I understood that grief doesn't truly end. It just transforms into something you can carry. I watched with a mixture of surprise and wariness as my parents' car pulled up near the lake. They emerged tentatively, Dad carrying what looked like a homemade cake while Mom clutched a thermos. For a moment, I felt that old anger rising. What were they doing here? This was supposed to be my safe space with my new family. Anna spotted them first, her laughter with Lucas and Diana fading as she pointed them out. The three of them stood by the shore, suddenly quiet, looking to me for direction. My parents kept their distance at first, hovering near their car like uncertain visitors at a stranger's home. I could see Mom's eyes following Anna as she played with Lucas, her expression a complicated mix of regret and longing. Dad just stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to another, the cake box balanced awkwardly in his hands. Neither of them approached until I finally nodded in acknowledgement. "We brought chocolate cake," Mom said softly as they came closer. "And hot chocolate. I remembered it was your favorite when we used to go camping." The mention of those long-ago family trips hit me harder than I expected. Those were good memories, from before everything fell apart. "Can we join you?" Dad asked, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Just for a little while?" I looked at Anna, who gave me a small nod. Diana squeezed my hand in silent support while Lucas watched the scene with curious eyes. I realized then that this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about all of us, the family I'd lost and the one I'd found. "You can stay," I said finally. The words weren't warm, but they weren't cold either. We sat in a circle on the blankets Diana had spread earlier. The conversation was stilted at first, punctuated by long silences and careful words. But as Anna warmed up to them, showing off the rock collection she'd gathered that morning, something in the atmosphere shifted. Mom poured hot chocolate into paper cups while Dad cut slices of cake that were too big, just like he always used to do. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. The hurt ran too deep for that. But watching them make this effort, coming to us instead of demanding we come to them, felt like the first honest step they'd taken in years. No grand gestures or tearful apologies, just cake and hot chocolate and the willingness to meet me where I was. As the afternoon wore on, I realized this might be what healing actually looked like. Not perfect, not complete, but a fragile beginning. A truce built on actions, not empty promises. That afternoon, after the chaos of emotions had finally settled, Anna stood up from her chair with a gentle smile. "But would you all mind if I said a prayer?" she asked, her voice soft, yet somehow filling the entire room. Everyone grew quiet as she closed her eyes and began to speak. "Thank you, Raphael, for the family you've left behind. Though you're gone, your spirit has brought us back together in ways we never imagined possible." Her words, simple but powerful, hung in the air like a healing balm. I glanced over at my mother and saw something I hadn't witnessed since the funeral. Tears streaming down her face, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for mine. The garden table was filled with dishes everyone had contributed. Mom's signature lasagna, Daniel's attempt at Raphael's favorite empanadas, and the chocolate cake Anna had baked from our grandmother's recipe. As we passed plates around, stories of Raphael flowed naturally. "Remember when he tried to build that treehouse?" Daniel laughed, "and ended up with 3 nails in his thumb?" Even Mom joined in, sharing how Raphael would sing terribly off-key while doing the dishes, just to annoy her. I found myself telling them about our last conversation, how he'd made me promise to keep writing my stories. He always believed in me more than I believed in myself, I admitted, surprised by how easily the words came now, without the crushing weight of grief stopping my breath. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the yard, I looked around at these people, my family, and felt something shift inside me. We were still broken in places, still learning how to fit together again, but there was something beautiful in our imperfection. The inheritance Raphael had left wasn't just money or property. It was this moment, this chance to rebuild what we'd lost. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "He would have loved this," she whispered. And for the first time, our fractured family felt whole again, bound together not by blood or obligation, but by the love and forgiveness we'd fought so hard to rebuild. In that moment, I understood that grief and joy could exist in the same heart, just as Raphael had somehow known all along. As the year drew to a close, I found myself sitting on my porch swing, watching the first snowfall of winter blanket the yard. The same yard where Anna had once played as a child, where we'd buried her beloved childhood dog, and where, just months ago, I couldn't imagine ever feeling peace again. Yet here I was, a mug of hot chocolate warming my hands, reflecting on how the meaning of family had transformed for us all. Family used to be a word that came with obligations, holiday dinners you couldn't miss, phone calls you had to return, and traditions you were expected to uphold regardless of how you felt. But grief had stripped away those pretenses, leaving only the raw truth of who actually showed up when the world fell apart. Lucas had become Anna's unexpected rock, showing up every Sunday with groceries and staying to help with household repairs. He never mentioned the will, never acted entitled to the inheritance he'd received. Instead, he'd put most of it in a college fund for Anna's future, Diana. Once the family gossip had transformed into Anna's fiercest advocate at school, confronting teachers when the other children's questions became too intrusive. "Your aunt may look tough," Anna had told me with a small smile, "but she cried when I got an A on my science project." Valeria and Thomas had created a standing Thursday night dinner tradition, bringing over home-cooked meals and board games. They never rushed to leave, never checked their watches, never made us feel like we were a burden. And my parents, that was the most surprising change of all. The reconciliation had been awkward, halting, filled with tearful apologies and long silences. They'd started with short visits, bringing Anna small gifts and asking permission before hugging her. Progress came in tiny increments, a shared laugh, a memory of Michael recalled without everyone dissolving into tears, a holiday where the empty chair at the table didn't consume us all. The scars remained, of course. There were still days when grief ambushed us, a song on the radio, a photo that fell from a book, Michael's birthday. But those scars no longer defined us. They had become part of our story, not its conclusion. As I watched Anna making snow angels in the yard, her laughter floating up to me like a prayer, I realized that family wasn't something you were given. It was something you built, person by person, moment by moment, choice by choice. And somehow, in the ruins of our greatest loss, we had managed to build something beautiful. Standing by the lake, Anna slipped her small hand into mine. "We're stronger now, aren't we, Mom?" she asked, her eyes shining with certainty. I hugged her tight, feeling Raphael's presence in the breeze. "Yes, sweetheart, we are," I whispered, watching the sunlight dance across the water. It was the same lake where Raphael had proposed to me 12 years ago, where we'd picnicked with baby Anna, where we'd scattered his ashes 6 months after the accident. My family had never returned my calls after the will reading. My sister had apparently expected to receive half of Raphael's life insurance, money he'd specifically designated for Anna's education. When the lawyer read those terms, Diane had stormed out, followed by my parents who couldn't look me in the eye. Their absence hurt, but no longer defined me. "I miss Daddy," Anna said softly. "But I'm not scared anymore." I nodded, understanding completely. The grief remained, but the paralyzing fear had subsided. We'd created new traditions, Sunday pancakes, nightly stargazing, and these monthly visits to the lake. Raphael's parents had become our strongest allies, stepping in when my own family stepped out. "Look what I found," Anna said, pulling a smooth, heart-shaped stone from her pocket. "It's like the one Dad gave you." I smiled through tears. Raphael had indeed given me a similar stone on our first date, claiming it was nature's Valentine. Anna had never heard that story. Somehow, she just knew. The lawyer had called last week. My parents had reached out, wanting to amend their will to include Anna again. Too little, too late. We didn't need their conditional love or their inheritance. Raphael had taught me that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's who stands beside you when the rest walk away. "Can we get ice cream?" Anna asked, already pulling me toward the path. "Absolutely," I laughed, marveling at her resilience. At 7 years old, She understood more about forgiveness and moving forward than my family ever had. As we walked away from the lake, I felt lighter. The betrayal had taught me to set boundaries, to recognize my worth. Raphael's death had broken me, but rebuilding myself had made me stronger than before. My sister's birthday party, the one they'd insisted on having the day after Raphael's funeral, was no longer a painful memory but a turning point. Anna skipped ahead, humming Raphael's favorite song. We were not defined by those who abandoned us in our darkest hour, but by how we carried each other through it. Our little family of two, surrounded by those who truly loved us, was more than enough.